Sunlight and artificial light are two very, very different things, and I'm going to break this down in this video. First, let's remind ourselves what light is. Light is electromagnetic energy, and that electromagnetic energy comes in waves of different lengths. So the longer the wavelength, the lower the energy. So you've got radio waves, which is the longer wavelengths. Then you've got microwaves, a little bit shorter. Infrared, a little bit shorter, but still long. In the visible light, again, the waves are getting shorter and shorter. And it goes all the way across. Ultraviolet radiation, more tightly packed than visible light. X-ray, more tightly packed than ultraviolet. And gamma rays, the strongest form of radiation energy that comes from the sun, are the tightest packed and thus the most energetic form of energy that comes from the sun. It's important to know that what we perceive as color is actually our eyes picking up on the different wavelengths of light that we are exposed to. Red light, for example, is of a longer wavelength, 665 nanometers roughly, is of a longer wavelength than violet light, which is the shortest wavelength that we can see with our eyes, around about 400 nanometers. And it goes all the way through. Indigo is a bit longer than violet, blue is a little bit longer than indigo, and so on and so forth. So what we are seeing as light, as color, the different colors are actually different wavelengths of light. Something that is red in color is mainly reflecting or putting out light that is in this wavelength of around about 665 nanometers, whereas something that is violet in color is mainly reflecting or emitting light in the roughly in the 400 nanometer range. There are lots of different forms of light. And it's very important to remember that the light that comes from the sun is mainly invisible to us. So around about 3 to 5% of that light is ultraviolet, which humans can't see. Most humans can't see most of it. Then you've got around about 55% of the light, the energy, the electromagnetic energy that comes from the sun is in the infrared portion, again, invisible to humans. Humans can only see the visible light, this portion of light. We've called it visible light, but obviously, the sun didn't tell us what it's called. That's just what we've called it. And this is the portion that we can see, which makes up a minority of the light, the electromagnetic energy that comes from the sun. Now, following on from that, you'll see here, these images here show you the range of light that come from different light sources. And again, here's daylight, sunlight. Now, compare sunlight with cool white LEDs, which I think are probably the most commonly used light bulbs these days. And also LEDs are used in TVs and devices and whatnot. And you can see very clearly the difference. Whereas sunlight here in the top left gives a range of the whole visible spectrum, and also goes over into the infrared and ultraviolet. These LED white light bulbs only give you visible light, and they only give you a big spike in the blue, a little bit of spike in the green, hardly any red. Same with fluorescent light bulbs. These are used in offices and trains and whatnot, the big long tubes. They give, they just give you little spikes of a bit of blue, a bit of green, a little bit of red, or orange, I should say, and nothing else. Compare it again with sunlight, which gives you a broad range of wavelengths. Fluorescent lights and white LEDs only give you a portion of those. And then it's interesting to note that the last one I look at here is incandescent lights. These are the old light bulbs that used to blow quite easily, and the ones that I grew up with, a lot of us grew up with. Those don't put out much in the 400 nanometer length wavelengths, but they give a lot of red light, and they also give quite a lot of their emission is in the infrared portion as well. So infrared, when we were growing up, sitting underneath these incandescent light bulbs, we were being bathed with a fair amount of infrared energy, infrared electromagnetic radiation. Nowadays, people are sitting cooped up underneath fluorescent lights or LED lights and looking at TV screens and whatnots, and they're getting a bunch of blue light, which is significant. Blue light is associated with triggering the secretion of stress hormones in the body, for example. And we're spending all of our days sitting under these cool white LEDs, being bombarded by blue light, which is triggering the stress hormone secretion. that's a little hint about what we're going to talk about in future videos. But that's the key point. Let's look at another. I'll look at another couple of images just to really bring that home. So here again, these are the different light sources compared. The spectral range, or the spectra, as it says here, from these different light sources being compared. Sunlight, full broad range. White LEDs, very spiky. There's a bit of spike in the blue, spike in the yellow and green, no red. And then you've got the incandescent light bulbs there. Not much blue at all, but it goes right the way up into the red and also into the infrared. And the last one I wanted to show here is the fact that these ones here, G, H, and I, are referring to sunlight in the morning, afternoon, and late afternoon. And you'll see here that the light in the morning, very broad range, not so much in the blue though, and not so much in the infrared in the morning. Sunlight in the morning doesn't have much ultraviolet. Sorry, there's lots of infrared all day from sunlight, but there's no ultraviolet really in the morning. Ultraviolet picks up in the afternoon, so the middle of the day, between 10 and 2 p.m. if you're living away from the equator. At the equator, it's all constant all day, pretty much all day. But in places like the UK and the US, in the afternoon, this is where you get more blue light from the sun. But you never get, one thing to point out, you never get blue light from the sun in the absence of all of the other spectrum. The Mama Nature has designed it, or it's such that you never get blue light on its own. Unlike some of these other forms of light, like the white LED, where you get blue light. We're being bombarded with blue light only, with no red whatsoever, and certainly no infrared. That's going to become significant when we start talking about the specific health impacts of the specific wavelengths of light. But the last one I wanted to show you here is this one here is in the late afternoon going into the evening. And it shows that once you get toward the end of daylight, there's no ultraviolet, very, very low amounts of blue, the shorter wavelengths. The majority of the light that we're getting in the afternoons, late afternoons going into the evenings, is in the red and infrared. And again, that's going to become important. That's going to become really important because red and infrared light have a particular impact on the body, particularly with regard to the generation of the generation of melatonin in our bodies, and helping our mitochondria in ourselves to repair from the damage caused by oxidation, which is a normal part of human existence. But we're going to come back to that. The key point is that sunlight gives you a broad range. Artificial light just gives you tiny little portions with no infrared. Now, the other key difference between artificial light and sunlight is that sunlight is much, much brighter. So this table here shows you the difference in lux measurements. Lux is just a way of measuring brightness. The difference in lux measurements between indoor forms of light and sunlight. So I'll just pinpoint on the office lighting. You see there in the middle, office lighting, you're getting between 320 and 500 lux. Compare that with an overcast day here. Even an overcast day, so it's cloudy day, you're at least looking at about 1,000 lux, which is twice what you get in office lighting, which our eyes would perceive as being bright, but it's nowhere near as bright as an overcast day. Full daylight now, you're looking at 10,000 to 25,000 lux, and then in direct sunlight, you're looking at upwards of 100,000, 120,000 lux. Orders of magnitude higher than the amount of brightness that you get indoors. And that is key as well, because as we'll see in future sessions, sunlight, the more sunlight that we get, the better our health will be, frankly. And then the other point as well to point out is that to finish with is that the different wavelengths of light, and again, sunlight gives us all of the different wavelengths. Artificial light only gives you some of them. Those different wavelengths of light penetrate to different depths in our body and have different impacts on our biology, on our chemistry, on our physiology, on an atomic molecular level. So you see here, this image here shows you that ultraviolet radiation, for example, penetrates down into the epidermis. And the epidermis is where we synthesize vitamin D. It's also where our coloration of our skin is determined, because that's where the melanocytes are, which put out melanin. We'll talk about that in a future video. And then the longer the wavelengths become, the further down the light penetrates into the body. And so 400 nanometers goes down into the dermis, blue light goes a bit further down into the dermis, and so on and so forth. You'll see that red light goes all the way down into the subcutaneous fat layer, and that means it's able to actually go into our blood vessels and impact our blood. That's going to become important in a future session, probably the next session, when we talk about the impact of sunlight on blood pressure and thus cardiovascular disease. And then you'll see here 1,000 nanometers, that's infrared light. That goes deep, deep down into the subcutaneous fat layer. And again, it means it's able to have an impact on a much wider range of cells and tissues in our bodies.